The desert sky rippled with the last streaks of burnt orange sunset when Rose Carter, 22, full-figured and striking beneath her wide-brimmed hat, nudged her Mustang mare, Juniper, toward a lonely town whose wooden sign hung crooked, Red Ridge. Her goal had been simple when she set off that morning: find a quiet place to rest her bones and start fresh. She carried only a saddlebag, a worn journal, and the stubborn hope that trouble wouldn't find her this time. But Red Ridge greeted her with the creak of saloon doors, the whining of a rusty windmill, and the all-too-familiar feeling that folks' eyes knew how to linger too long. Rose kept her chin lifted. "We'll only stay a day or two, girl," she whispered to Juniper. "Just need peace, just a bit of it." But peace didn't come, not right away. Inside the saloon, a handful of cowhands paused their card game. A piano with 3 broken keys attempted a tune that gave up halfway. No one spoke. And then George Callahan stepped into view. Tall, weathered, mid-30s, coat dusted with trail dirt, boots worn, hat tipped forward just enough to hide the sharp blue of his eyes until he lifted his head and met her gaze fully. And Lord, did he freeze! His whiskey glass slipped, hit the counter, and rolled, slow as a tumbleweed, off the edge. The entire saloon seemed suddenly unsure whether to breathe. Because Rose wasn't just beautiful, she was the kind of beautiful that arrived like a storm, warm, powerful, and impossible to ignore. George had seen plenty of women in his years, but none who carried herself like she did, like she knew exactly what she was worth, even if the world hadn't always agreed. "You riding through?" he managed, voice cracking a little. "Just passing by, looking for somewhere to stay the night?" The bartender swallowed hard, then nodded to the upstairs rooms. Rose took the key without fuss, ignoring how several eyes followed her. But George, he didn't just look. He studied, observed, like he was trying to solve a riddle that had just ridden into his quiet life. When she reached the stairs, she felt a tap at her boot heel, soft, tentative. A small voice whispered, "Your horse is real pretty." Rose turned and found a little girl, 6, freckled nose, straw blonde hair in a crooked braid, boots far too big for her small feet. She held a wooden pony tucked under one arm, missing a wheel. Rose softened immediately. "Thank you kindly. What's your name?" "Clara," the girl chirped. "My papa fixes horses. Does your horse need fixin'?" George rushed over, embarrassment and fatherly panic mixing on his face. "Clara, honey!" "Sorry, ma'am, she wanders and talks too much." "She talks just enough," Rose said warmly. "Nice to meet you both." Clara beamed. George didn't. Not because he was unfriendly. He simply had no idea what to do with the sudden heat climbing up his neck. Rose tipped her hat in farewell and climbed the stairs. George watched her go, watched a stranger who carried confidence and weariness in equal measure, a woman who looked like she'd crossed more than miles, a woman who somehow made a cowboy who'd lived most of his life in dusty quiet feel completely, utterly speechless. When Rose shut her room door behind her, she let out a long exhale. She hadn't meant to draw attention. She hadn't come to charm cowboys or spark curiosity. She'd come for peace. But the way George had looked at her, the way something almost hopeful flickered behind his eyes, stirred something she wasn't prepared for. She set her hat on the bedpost. "Just a night," she whispered to herself. "Just a quiet night." But Red Ridge had other plans. Because peace was never as simple as she hoped. And sometimes, she knew, fate brought people to the places they needed most, even if they didn't know it yet. Downstairs, George wiped the counter, though it didn't need wiping. "Papa," Clara said, tugging his sleeve, "you like her." George's ears burned red. "I don't—" "Clara, go upstairs and get ready for bed." Clara only grinned. "She's real pretty." George looked at the stairs again. "Yeah, Pretty didn't even begin to cover it. But pretty wasn't what unsettled him. It was the quiet sadness behind Rose's smile, something he recognized because he carried a piece of it too. And just like that, the dusty stillness of Red Ridge shifted, because a plus-size heroine seeking peace had ridden into town and left a cowboy completely, utterly speechless.
Morning sunlight crept through the thin curtains in Rose's rented room, turning the dust motes into swirling gold. She stretched slowly, wincing at the ache in her shoulders, the kind of ache long travel, sleepless nights, and too many memories could carve into a woman's bones. She washed her face in the porcelain basin, tying her coils back with a faded blue ribbon, a ribbon her mother once said made her look like a dreamer. Dreamers get hurt, Rose thought grimly. She strapped on her boots, slung her saddlebag across her shoulder, and headed downstairs. The saloon was nearly empty, except for the bartender wiping down tables, and little Clara perched on a bar stool, swinging her short legs while eating an apple way too big for her tiny hands. George stood nearby, repairing a cracked leather bridle with focus as tight as a lasso pulled taut. Clara spotted Rose first. "Miss Rose," she squealed, almost falling off the stool. "Papa said you're staying just one night. That's not enough nights." "Clara," George murmured, "let the lady breathe." Rose laughed softly. "It's all right." Then she turned to Clara. "And I'm not sure just yet. I go where I'm needed, or where I'm not chased away." George's head snapped up at that, blue eyes sharp with unspoken questions. He didn't ask, not yet. Clara hopped off the stool and tugged Rose's sleeve. "Want to see our ranch? We got horses and chickens, and Papa makes the best biscuits in Red Ridge." "I do not," George mumbled, tightening a buckle. "I make edible biscuits, that's all." Rose smiled at the exchange. It felt normal, soft, something she hadn't felt in a long time. But normal didn't come easy. Not with the weight she carried. George cleared his throat. "Clara's right about the ranch, though. It's quiet. Good place if you're looking for quiet." "I am," Rose answered. "More than you know." She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. The kind of quiet she sought wasn't just silence. It was safety. A place where a woman didn't feel hunted by her past, or judged by her shape, or blamed for trouble she never caused. "You can ride out with us later," Clara offered. "Papa's teaching me how to trot without bouncing like a sack of beans." George's face reddened instantly. "Clara Jean Callahan!" Rose burst into warm laughter before he could finish. "I'd like that." George stared at her laughter like it was water in a drought. He'd seen beautiful women, elegant ones, tough ones, loud ones. But Rose's beauty wasn't the kind that tried to stand out. Hers lived in the little things. The way her eyes softened when she spoke to Clara, the way her full cheeks dimpled when she smiled, the quiet steadiness she carried like armor. He didn't know her story, but he knew a hurting soul when he saw one. And Lord, did he want to know more. The walk to the stables on the edge of town was slow, Clara skipping ahead, Rose and George trailing behind. The morning air smelled of mesquite and distant rain, a storm brewing beyond the horizon. "You're new to Red Ridge," George said, hands tucked in his belt loops. "Just passing through." He nodded slowly. "Most folks who say that are running from something, or toward something. Maybe both." George glanced at her, but she kept her gaze forward, shoulders squared. Her tone wasn't defensive, just honest. "I'm not here to pry," he said gently, "but this town's small. Folks will try." "I've handled worse than nosy townsfolk." Her voice dipped. "Much worse." George sensed the wall she placed around herself, brick by quiet brick. Instead of pushing, he shifted the subject. "So what brings you to wandering?" Rose breathed slowly. "I needed to find peace." "From what?" She paused, chewing the inside of her cheek before answering. "A man who didn't know how to love me. Not the right way. Not any way, really." George's jaw tightened. "He hurt you?" "Not with fists. Sometimes words bruise worse." He nodded once, like he understood. "Men can be fools, some worse than others." They reached the stables where Juniper waited, snorting softly. Clara ran to pet the mare's nose. George watched Rose approach her horse with the tenderness of someone who'd been saved by her animal more than once. "She trusts you," he said. "She's earned mine, too." Rose stroked Juniper's neck. The mare leaned into her palm. A comfort. A reminder she wasn't alone. George leaned against the stall door. "For what it's worth, Red Ridge ain't a bad place to start over, if a person ever wanted to." Rose met his gaze fully. The world seemed to quiet. George swallowed hard. "Just saying." She looked away first, heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. No. She wasn't here to get attached. She wasn't here for a cowboy with soft eyes and a gentle way of speaking. She was here to heal, not repeat mistakes. A thunderclap rumbled far off. Clara tugged Rose's hand. "Miss Rose, Papa says storms come fast here. You gotta stay till it passes." Rose looked at George. He nodded. "Storm will be rough. Roads will wash out. You might need shelter for the night." "Just until the storm passes," Rose said. George felt a spark in his chest that he tried, unsuccessfully, to hide. Because storms always brought change. And this one? It would change everything.
The first raindrops splattered the dusty ground as George, Rose, and little Clara rode toward the ranch. The sky darkened fast, thunder rolling in waves, lightning flicking like silver knives across the clouds. Juniper snorted, but stayed steady beneath Rose's sure hands. George rode beside her, his stallion Ranger trotting lightly despite the approaching downpour. Clara sat in front of George, her small hands clutching the saddle horn as she squealed every time thunder cracked. "Storm's moving quicker than I thought," George said over the wind. "We'll stable the horses first, then get inside." Rose held her hat with one hand. "Lead the way, Cowboy!" He blinked, those 3 words hitting him harder than expected. Nobody called him Cowboy anymore, not since his wife died 5 years back, not since he lost the woman who once steadied him. He wasn't prepared for how Rose's voice, warm, confident, pulled something buried awake inside him. By the time they reached the ranch, rain sheeted down in heavy curtains. George swung off Ranger, lifting Clara down before helping Rose dismount. "I can handle myself," she teased as he offered a hand. "I know," George replied, hand hovering but not pushing, just being polite. She placed her hand in his anyway. "Then thank you." His breath caught, not because of the gesture, but because of how natural it felt. Her hand was warm, strong, steady, a woman who knew her own strength. Inside the barn, Clara ran to check the chickens while George and Rose removed saddles and wiped down the horses. "You're good with animals," he said. Rose nodded. "They don't judge, don't ask questions. Just take the care you give." George paused, tightening a strap. "People should be more like that." Rose smiled faintly.
people rarely are. Lightning illuminated her face, soft yet guarded, like a lantern behind frosted glass. George wanted to know what shadows shaped her, what stories deepened the sadness in her eyes, but he didn't ask. Something about Rose told him she offered truths in her own time. Once the horses were settled, George gestured toward the house. "Come on, I'll fix supper. Clara'll never forgive me if I don't feed you biscuits." "You promised edible biscuits." "On a good day, they're almost good," he winked, then immediately regretted it, clearing his throat like a man startled by his own boldness. Rose laughed, an easy, rich sound that made the storm seem less fierce. The ranch house was simple but warm. Worn quilts draped over the sofa, boots lined the wall, a half-finished jigsaw puzzle set on the table beside Clara's crayons. "This is home," Rose whispered, more to herself than anyone. George hung his coat and stoked the fire. Clara fetched plates. The smell of warm biscuits soon filled the air, followed by sizzling bacon and buttered beans. Rose's stomach growled. George looked over his shoulder. "Haven't eaten proper in a while, have you?" Rose hesitated. "Not really." "Well," George said, flipping the bacon, "that's about to change." When they sat at the table, Clara jabbered about horses and school and her love of watermelon. George listened with a father's patience. Rose listened with a quiet ache she didn't show. Halfway through eating, Clara asked, "Miss Rose, do you got a family?" Rose froze. Her fork halted midair. George tensed. "Clara." "It's all right." Rose gently lowered her fork. "I had a family once. Some of them didn't treat me right. Some of them loved me. Some are gone." Clara tilted her head. "Gone where?" "Somewhere better, I hope." George reached across the table and touched Rose's hand. Small gesture, big meaning. "You don't gotta say more." Rose didn't pull away. She could have, should have. But the warmth of his touch, steady, kind, unraveled a knot she'd carried for years. She met his gaze, and the world seemed to still. Thunder rumbled outside. "Why'd you leave where you came from?" Clara asked. Rose dropped her eyes. "Because a man I loved made me believe I wasn't enough. He made me feel small, even when I'm not." George felt something hot ignite in his chest. "You're more than enough." Rose's breath hitched. She wasn't used to hearing that. Not from a man, not with strings or lies or control. She studied George, his rough knuckles, his soft eyes, the kind of strength that protected instead of intimidated. "You barely know me." "Sometimes," George said softly, "you don't have to know someone long to recognize truth." Silence wrapped around them, not heavy, but hopeful. Clara, oblivious, stuffed another biscuit into her mouth. "These are good, Papa." "Told you," he said, though he kept his eyes on Rose. Outside, rain pounded the roof. Inside, something else brewed, gentler than the storm, yet more powerful. Rose leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as if shielding herself. "I didn't come here for this." "Don't know what this is yet, but it ain't gotta be rushed." Rose swallowed hard. Her heart beat louder than the thunder. "He's kind, too kind. Dangerous for a woman who'd learned kindness often hid cruelty underneath." She pushed back her chair. "Maybe I should turn in for the night." George nodded slowly. "Bedroom's down the hall. Storm will keep you here till morning." Rose paused at the doorway. "George, thank you. For the food, for the company, for the smile you gave my daughter. I haven't seen her grin that big in a long time." Rose softened. "She's a sweet girl." "She likes you." Rose held his gaze. "Do you?" The question hung in the air, fragile, bold, impossible to ignore. George's breath caught. He didn't answer with words. He answered with the softness in his eyes. Rose turned away before she could feel too much, but she heard Clara whisper to her father as she walked down the hall, "Papa, I think she's making you happy." George exhaled shakily. "She is." Though Rose didn't hear those words, she felt them, deep, quiet, and alive.
The storm raged through the night, clawing at the roof, rattling the shutters. Rose lay awake on the soft quilt George had set out for her, staring at the ceiling as the thunder vibrated the walls. She wasn't scared of storms. She'd slept through worse in abandoned barns and wagons. But she was scared of the softness settling into her chest. This ranch felt safe, too safe. And George felt like danger wrapped in gentleness, the kind she had no defenses for. Sometime near dawn, the wind died down. Rain slowed to a soft whisper. Rose slipped out of bed, boots in hand, not wanting to wake anyone. She needed air, space, distance between herself and the feelings blooming too fast. But when she stepped into the kitchen, she found George already there. He sat by the window, sunrise bleeding orange behind him, coffee steaming in his hands. His hair was tousled, eyes heavy from little sleep. He looked tired, solid, and achingly human. "You sleep at all?" he asked softly. "A bit," Rose lied. George nodded. "Storm's easing. Roads'll dry by midday." Her chest tightened. Midday meant leaving. Midday meant returning to her wandering, her uncertainty, her solitude, the life she'd carved out of necessity, not desire. "Clara's still asleep," George added. "Storm scared her." "I could hear her whimpering a little," Rose whispered. "Wanted to go to her, but you could have." His voice was warm. "She'd have been glad for it." Rose stared out the window, fingers tightening on the back of the chair. "I'm not staying long enough for her to get attached." George's brows drew together. "Maybe you should let other folks decide what they get attached to. It's not that simple." "It could be." She swallowed hard, feeling the wall between them splintering. "George," she whispered, "I didn't come here looking for someone to care about you, for somewhere to rest, for a life that ain't just running from ghosts." His words struck her like a lasso snapping tight. She spun on him. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed softly, "but I want to." Her breath caught. George stood slowly, stepping closer but not touching her, leaving a respectful space. Close enough to feel his warmth, far enough to leave her room to breathe. "You carry hurt like it's a saddle glued to your shoulders. You talk like a woman who's been told she was too much or not enough." Her eyes burned. "Someone did tell me that." "Told you what?" "That I was too big, too opinionated, too stubborn, too loud, too complicated, too much of everything except what he wanted." George's jaw flexed. "He sounds like a blind fool." Rose shook her head slowly. "I made him believe it, made me question every part of myself. I kept shrinking for him until there wasn't much left." She pressed her hand to her sternum. "I lost myself." George took another slow step, voice rough with emotion. "You ain't lost now. I don't know that. I know it because you walked into my town like you owned the horizon. You walked into my life without even trying, and suddenly everything felt lighter." Rose blinked hard. "Don't say things like that. I'll only say what's true. That's the problem," she whispered. "I'm starting to believe you." Silence fell, hot, thick, breathtaking. Then Clara's sleepy voice cut through from the hallway. "Papa? Miss Rose?" Rose turned away, relief and disappointment crashing at once. Clara rubbed her eyes and walked straight to Rose, lifting her arms in a wordless request. Rose froze. George nodded gently. "She wants a hug." Rose bent, lifting the small girl into her arms.
Clara tucked her head against Rose's shoulder like she'd have belonged there all along. "You're warm," she mumbled. "I'm sweet," she said. George watched them, something deep and unspoken glowing in his eyes. Clara perked up suddenly. "Miss Rose, can you stay for breakfast? Please?" Rose looked at George. He held her gaze, steady, quiet. "You're welcome to." She felt the ache rise again, a longing she hadn't allowed herself in years. Slowly she nodded. "Just breakfast." Clara cheered and scurried to the table. George approached Rose, voice low enough for only her to hear. "Breakfast can be the start of whatever you want it to be." Rose swallowed hard. "You keep saying things that make it real hard to leave." "Good," he murmured. "Maybe you shouldn't." Rose looked away, fear tightening her spine. "George, I can't give Clara false hope, or you. You ain't giving me false anything." His voice softened. "You're giving me something real." The word real landed heavy in her chest. She exhaled shakily. "I don't know how to do this." "You don't got to know. You just got to stay long enough to try." Clara interrupted again, yelling, "Papa, the biscuits are burning." George scrambled to the stove, cursing under his breath. Rose laughed, the tension easing, but the decision pressing. Stay, leave, trust, run. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside her heart was only beginning, and she knew, one way or another, by sundown, she would have to choose.
Breakfast was chaos in the sweetest possible way. George trying to keep biscuits from burning, Clara insisting Rose sit beside her. Rose, despite everything inside her urge and caution, allowing herself to smile, letting the warmth of the kitchen seep into her bones. It felt dangerously close to belonging, and belonging, she knew, came with a cost. After the plates were cleared, Rose stepped outside. The storm had washed the land clean. Sunlight shimmered across puddles in the yard, horses grazing in damp pastures, laundry snapping on the line like a row of white flags. The calm after a storm always felt like a trick, a lull meant to scare a person into thinking peace was permanent. Rose didn't trust peace. Peace had always been temporary in her life. She touched Juniper's damp mane, smoothing it gently. "We'll be gone soon," she whispered, "before anyone gets hurt." But the words didn't feel true, not anymore. Footsteps approached from behind. George's voice came soft, careful. "I figured I'd find you out here." Rose didn't turn. "Storm's past, road's clear. I should go." "You could, but you don't want to." Rose closed her eyes. He was right, and that terrified her. George stepped beside her, hat low against the morning sun. His presence was grounding, as if the earth steadied itself around him. "You're thinking about leaving because you're scared, not because you want to." Rose swallowed hard. "Men like you, good men, they don't stay, not when they get to know me." He frowned. "Why wouldn't I?" "Because I'm not small, not quiet, not easy. The last man I loved told me I took up too much space, in his life, in his bed, in his world." George's breath left him in a slow, angry exhale. "That man was weak." Rose shook her head. "He made me feel unworthy." "Then he was cruel." "Maybe." I stared at the horizon. "But he taught me not to trust any good thing that shows up." George turned fully toward her, voice low and sure. "Rose, you are a good thing that showed up. For me, for Clara, the way she looks at you," his voice caught, "I haven't seen her warm to anyone like that since her mama passed." Rose's eyes softened. "Clara is special. She's my world, and she likes you.
I like you." "George, no." He held up a hand, gentle but firm. "I ain't saying it to make you stay. I'm saying it because it's truth. Truth deserves to be spoken, even if it scares folks." Rose wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't know how to be part of someone's life anymore. You don't gotta jump into nothing. Just take one step." Rose hesitated. "And if I disappoint you?" George chuckled, deep, warm, honest. "Rose, I've been disappointed by weather, cattle, fences, life itself. You walked into Red Ridge and breathed life into a home that's been quiet for years." She felt tears sting. "I didn't mean to. That's the best part," he whispered. A soft tug at her skirt cut the tension. Clara looked up, hair messy, face bright. "Miss Rose, you want to come see my favorite horse? His name is Buttermilk, and he's real ugly, but I love him." Rose burst into a laugh that came from someplace tender and unguarded. She wiped her eyes quickly. "I'd love to meet him." Clara grabbed her hand without hesitation. Something inside Rose cracked, something hard and lonely she'd carried far too long. George watched them walk toward the corral, that slow, quiet hope blooming in his chest. He moved beside Rose, not touching her, just close enough to remind her she wasn't alone. When Clara scampered ahead, George leaned in slightly. "You can stay for a day, for lunch, for supper, for tonight. No promises beyond that. Just moments, one at a time." Rose stared at her boots, then at George's calm, waiting expression. He wasn't pushing, wasn't rushing, wasn't demanding. He was simply offering. And no one had ever offered her gentleness without condition. Slowly Rose exhaled, the kind of exhale that releases chains. "All right," she whispered. "I can stay for today." George's shoulders eased, relief so visible that it made her smile. "Today's a good start." "And tomorrow?" she asked cautiously. "Tomorrow," George said, voice soft but firm, "we'll see what you want, not what you fear." Clara approached, leading the world's ugliest, friendliest horse. "Miss Rose, he likes you already." Rose burst into a laugh that came from someplace tender and unguarded. She wiped her eyes quickly. "I'd love to meet him." George watched her, realization settling deep inside him. He wanted this woman, not as a guest, not as a passerby, but as something real, something lasting. But he wouldn't say it, not yet. Rose stroked Juniper's mane and looked at George with gentle vulnerability. "Maybe I was meant to find this place." George stepped closer, sunlight warming the space between them. "Maybe this place was waiting for you." Rose held his gaze, heart steady for the first time in years. "I'm tired of running." "Then rest, right here." The wind rustled the grass. Birds sang in the wet morning air. Clara giggled at her silly horse. And Rose, beautiful, brave, full-figured, and finally free, let her heart settle in a place she hadn't expected. Home. Not forever, not promised, but peacefully, unmistakably, for now. And sometimes, for now, was the beginning of everything.